5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben.
I'm Mark Edward.
And this is Amateur Hour.
As you can tell.
So, Mark, what's been going on?
Not a lot.
Good answer. Very, very disruptive. I love it. You know, you just kind of ramble on and on and on. Would you shut up 5 minutes and let me talk?
Yeah.
Good Lord. It's been a while since we've done this. We do talk offline some. Me and Matt sometimes.
Next now and then we'll be reading an article here or a book there, but
yeah,
I have not had a lot of personal time the last few months to do much deep dives into Bible scholarship.
No, but your blog has been a little busy, right?
No, not really.
How many you posted?
Just a couple of shorter pieces. I haven't done like one of my longer articles with footnotes and everything for maybe 4 or 5 months. Maybe longer. I can't remember quite when I did that last one.
Yeah, I don't remember either. Yeah. But I'll put a link up to your website, obviously. So
Thank you.
How's the weather?
Cold, chilly, cloudy, windy, really windy.
Ugh. That's the worst part about the cold is when it's windy.
I can usually tolerate, like I can go outside and be fine in a t-shirt and a long sleeve shirt at about 35 degrees, and I'll be fine out there for about 10, 15 minutes. But when the wind picks up, that's when that's painful. Yeah,
it's even like 40s. It's shorts weather to me. I grew up in New York, like the snow belt.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
You know, so I'm used to cold temperatures, and I'm just a guy down here in the South who doesn't mind it, except when the wind picks up. Then you're like, and I'm 40, 41? Am I 41? I'm 41.
Isn't it bizarre how like once you pass like 30, you start to forget your own age?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like early onset. What's the word? I don't remember. I know I'm getting old now because my parents, they just told me they got hearing aids. And my dad's 80. Was he 80? He was 80 this year, yeah. And my mom's only 72. But they have hearing aids, and it's making me feel old. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So anything else? Anything exciting or momentous?
No, not too much at the moment.
Yeah, no, I figured you lead a pretty normal life, no secret spy stuff and whatnot. So
no.
So I did some work out in my sheds today because I noticed this past summer that something was getting into one of my boxes of books. So I had to get Tupperware and put the books in Tupperware, like the tote boxes, whatever you call them.
Oh, yeah,
and,
the larger
so
ones.
So I had to get one of those. But I was going through another box of old stuff I had, and I found this. It's an old kids' cup of the Dukes of Hazzard.
Half of your audience doesn't even know what that show is,
and the other half offended. But yeah, it's from 1981. The cup is. This is crazy. I wasn't born yet.
Why do you have that?
Well, I had it as a kid, and then I years ago, before we moved in this house, and I had a house, or a trailer, really is what it was, and I had an office, and I had a desk, and I would put little knickknacks on it like this, and baseballs. I love the Yankees. But and then when I moved, I put it all in a box, and I was going through all my stuff today, and I pulled this. I was really excited about it. This is pretty cool. Yeah, I can probably get it like $2-3 on eBay. So
just the contextual disparity of somebody who loves the Yankees and a show about the Deep South, to the point that they named their car after the general of the Southern Rebellion.
I mean, I am nothing if not interesting. Okay, so and humble, but no, I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, I had the General Lee toy car, like the Matchbox car. Oh, man, no, it was Hot Wheels, I think it was. And
Micro Machines.
I don't think I was. No, it was bigger. Mine was bigger than that. It was probably like this big. Okay. But I wasn't really into the show that much as a kid. And wow, this cup is old. I cannot believe how old this cup is.
What's it made out of? Lead?
No, it's like a plastic lead. Yes. I drank out of it all the time. It explains so much. Yeah, it's just a cheap plastic. I wonder if it came from like a. No, it wouldn't have. I don't think McDonald's ever had those special. Way back when they used to sell like glass cups of like Ronald McDonald and the Hamburglar and all that. But yeah, no. So that was exciting, and also pulling out some books and seeing some old ones. Lots of stuff I forgot I had, So, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Exodus. Yeah. Which is something I haven't really thought about in a good couple of years. So let's talk about the Exodus. First of all, what is it? What does the Bible say about it? So let's start there.
Sometimes, like, this is me having to like check the level of knowledge on biblical topics and like what the average person knows, because I have an occasion where somebody that I was really good friends with, who talked occasionally about going to church now and then growing up, and this person had no idea who Goliath was. Just straight up did not know the story, did not know where the name Goliath came from. And this was not an uneducated person. So, but my point is, we need to explain the Exodus, because we can't just assume everybody knows what it is. Even people who are religious don't always know all the details of their own religion.
Oh yeah, that is very true. What was it? So Louisiana. This is kind of a tangent, but Louisiana wants to put the 10 Commandments in every school now. Yeah. And somebody was on, I think it was Facebook or something, but I commented and said, "Oh, great! Now I got to tell my kids they shouldn't cover their neighbors' slaves." And some fundamentalist commented underneath it, "That's not one of the 10 Commandments." So I had to post a text that says, yes, the 10th. It said, it is literally the 10th commandment. So you're right. There is you cannot assume that people who claim to believe some of the things they believe actually understand or have the basic knowledge about what the texts say. So, oh gosh. Yeah. Okay. So
anyway,
what is the Exodus?
So the Exodus is going back to the book of Genesis, very first book of the Bible. We have, we'll just say there's this group of special people that God, the creator of the universe, has said, I have a special relationship with you. And these people, who we'll just call the Israelites for simplicity, these Israelites move into the land of Egypt to escape a famine, and they end up living there long term and are eventually enslaved by the Egyptians. And depending on which part of the Old Testament you read, about 400 years later, God says, wait, I have a special relationship with this people. I need to get them out of slavery. And he raises up a leader from the Israelites, a guy who just happened to be raised in the royal house of the Pharaoh. And this this leader, Moses, challenges Pharaoh and says, God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says no. So God sends a series of disasters to Egypt, one after the other, until we get to about 10. And finally, the Pharaoh says, okay, you can leave. Long story short, all of the Israelites are allowed to leave Egypt. They escape from their slavery. A lot of people and animals go with them. And they migrate northward from Egypt into this land that their ancestors were promised to live in by God. That's the gist of the story. There's a lot of finer details along the way, but that's the overall gist. More or less what you'll see in The Prince of Egypt if you want to watch a fantastic DreamWorks movie.
Yeah, or the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. So word Exodus literally means the way out or a way out.
A departure.
Yeah, exactly. It's Ex and Hadas. So why shouldn't we just accept the narrative told to us in the book of Exodus and the preceding material in Genesis prima facie? Why shouldn't we just say, okay, that's must be how it happened, because that's what the texts say?
So that's like the big question we're really getting at in our chat tonight, which is the Exodus as told in the Bible is not historical. We have spent, and what by we I mean academia, like scholarship, archaeologists, historians have been like looking into this for 200 plus years. Once critical scholarship really became a thing, and the universal consensus of critical scholars is it didn't happen. Now you can have individual scholars here and there who will argue about smaller details, like maybe the Exodus was inspired by a much smaller scale event, kind of like it, or maybe it was inspired by something much later in history that was kind of pushed backwards according to social memory, something like that. But the story as told in the Bible, in the book of Exodus and the couple of books after that, and mentioned here and there, it didn't happen.
Why? Why say that? I mean, what about the story itself seems absolutely either incredible or maybe doesn't comport with what we do know? Like, what's the issue with the actual narrative?
So, a point that I bring up in these kinds of conversations about historicity of people or things or events or places, particularly when it comes to the Bible, is when we look for evidence of this kind of thing, the evidence needs to be proportionate to whatever we're talking about. When it comes to somebody like Jesus, there's the big online debate. It's not really a debate offline. It's the big online debate about whether Jesus existed, at all. And the people who doubt his existence as a historical person, that they say he's completely fictional, beginning to end, I think that they lose sight of the evidence needing to be proportionate to who he was and what our sources say was his degree of impact in his lifetime. According to our sources, which I'll just say is the New Testament and a couple of texts outside of it from the 1st century CE, during his lifetime, Jesus was a relatively unknown person.
Yeah.
He had a very close, devout following, but it wasn't big. Maybe a few hundred people at most. And that's maybe. But people tend to judge the person of Jesus based on the size of his following in the 2,000 years since then. It's the biggest religion in the world now, Christianity. Yeah. Therefore, that must mean Jesus had a gigantic impact during his lifetime, but he really didn't. And if that's the case, any historical evidence we look for this person, Jesus, has to be proportionate to who he was. And he was relatively unknown. Therefore, we should not really expect to find any archaeological evidence or very much literary evidence beyond what his personal followers wrote. Then you go back to the book of Genesis, all the way at the other end of the Bible, and you have a guy named Abraham. He's the patriarch of Israel.
Yeah.
But he's just one dude. And his household is what, 90 people?
Yeah.
He's relatively wealthy for his time period, but he's just one guy. And he lived, according to the Bible, like, what, 150 years, something like that? It's a long time for the time period. Probably not accurate, but he's just one person, one guy running one household. And he's a nomad at that. So we really shouldn't expect to find any historical evidence for this person if Abraham existed.
Yeah.
So we're going to set aside whether he existed or not, because that's not what our point right now is. But then we look at something like the Exodus. The Exodus, according to the story told in the Bible, was an event that lasted maybe a few weeks or a few months. Who knows exactly? The text doesn't say. But this event wiped out an enormous part of the population of Egypt, humans, animals, and plants, on land and in rivers, and if you want to say the Red Sea or the Reed Sea or whatever. It led to the death of the Pharaoh's son, who would have been the vice regent of the whole kingdom. He's dead. It would have crippled the economy of Egypt for the time period, because you have all of these disasters, these plagues, wiping out agriculture, wiping out animal husbandry, wiping out their it's polluting their rivers, it's polluting their land. Most of their slaves have left the country. This kingdom is going to collapse. And then on top of that, you have millions, literally millions of people and animals leaving all at once. Like, this should have been nothing short of a complete ecological and economic disaster for a large region of the ancient Southwest Asian world. And yet we find no evidence that any such thing happened. We don't find any evidence of millions of living people or animals wandering through the desert. We don't find any evidence of Egypt having been crippled for a generation. It's not there in the historical record. It's gone. Or not gone. It's just not present at all. There's no reference to it by neighboring countries, anything. For an event of this magnitude, of this scale, we should find anything referencing it outside of the Bible itself. And instead we find nothing. That's a problem for it being a historical event.
Yeah, that's very surprising. Although they did find a chariot wheel in the Red Sea, Mark.
You shut your mouth when you're talking.
That proves the Exodus happened.
We have a handful of scholars in the last century, people who got their scholarship from a diploma mill or just outright fabricated it, like they invented it, who claim that they discovered, chariot wheels from Pharaoh's army chasing the Israelites out of Egypt in the bottom of the sea, or they found something buried in the sand that proves that all of these animals died and were buried together, or they found the grave sites of the Israelites patriarchs before they were enslaved. Like,
Joseph.
These have all been completely, thoroughly, 100% debunked.
Yeah.
It's either somebody lying outright, such as a guy like Ron Wyatt, this very unjustly famous artifact hunter for Christians, who he just outright lied about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Or you have, on the other hand, people who might genuinely think that this evidence is what it is, but they're just misinterpreting it and maybe kind of sticking their head in the sand to avoid hearing the criticism pointing out how, like, no, this isn't what you're thinking it is.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a frequent problem in fundamentalist apologetics, is this idea that, the evidence has to be interpreted in light of the Bible and not vice versa, like, or in tandem. So some of the specific issues, like, for example, the I think it's Exodus chapter 12, talks about 600,000 men,
not
not including
men,
children.
women, and children.
Exactly.
Men.
Yeah. And then in the book of Numbers, you have a similar amount, and that's, men who are able to fight in war 20 years of age and up.
Yeah.
And so even if you assume that everyone just has one wife and they only have one kid, that's almost 2 million people.
Yeah.
Who not only escaped from Egypt and caused, like you said, an economic collapse, they have to cross the Red Sea, like in one night. like they are booking it.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the fastest humans you've ever met, plus the animals and everything else. So there's just elements of the story that seem outlandish, which should probably clue us in as to what is probably going on in the narrative itself, that this is not necessarily history as it is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not mythology, but like one person, Nat Rittermeyer, who he runs the website Biblical Historical Context, he likens it to the Mayflower story. In American folklore, where
mythology might not be the correct term, but the phrase I prefer is foundation myth.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so like the Mayflower does that. You have these pilgrims that come over, and it's this big banquet and all this. None of this, yes, the pilgrims came over, but a lot of the stuff is just made up. It's just hype.
It's very highly glamorized.
Exactly. Which is
like
exactly
the common picture we have is pilgrims, they come over, hey, Indians, let's sit together at a table and have dinner. And it's really these immigrants from Europe sailing across the ocean for 4 or 5 months, not knowing if they're going to live, and most of them don't. And then they get here and they don't know the local area, so they're starving for months on end, literally eating tree roots to survive.
Yep.
And then they maybe see some native population that they probably don't get along with right away.
Yep. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. Oh, and by the way, we're recording this before Thanksgiving. It won't come out before Thanksgiving because, but...
Oh, yeah. Total coincidence.
But hey, that's cool. Like, it's a tie-in. It's just really cool.
We're going to come back to that foundation myth point much later, but
good.
I'm glad you brought it up because I do have something about that in my head.
So what other elements in the narrative seem either far-fetched or maybe not even far-fetched, but problematic? Besides, like, the population one is an obvious one. Like,
the population one is probably the biggest problem with the story. Like, if you're looking at it from a neutral perspective, the scale is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Even if we scale it down, though, you have to, like, there's still details that don't really fit with what we know from history, such as the pharaoh that is implied to be the pharaoh of the story would be Ramesses II, and there's no record of his son dying in any such fashion. There's no record of his kingdom, his dynasty being harmed in any way like this. Then you have, if you want to get into it, there's let's say maybe there was an event like this in history. You still have the non-falsifiable supernatural elements. And now that's a matter of faith. We can't really get into that because by definition, if these are miraculous supernatural events, you can't really replicate them. And at that rate, you can kind of say, well, if there's no evidence because God didn't leave evidence, like, okay, can't really argue with that. So we have to, it's problematic in the sense that we can't interact with it. We can't interact with it in any meaningful way. So we just have to kind of set it aside. So what we're left with is this story where it only makes sense if you scale it way, way down to the point that it's almost invisible on the world stage. And at that rate, why is the story so impactful?
Yeah. Why does it become so vital to the way later authors
Yeah,
either directly refer to it or appeal to, use motifs based
it
on it? I'm
becomes
thinking Isaiah.
foundational. It's the
Exactly.
foundation for their religion.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it didn't happen the way some biblical narratives claimed that did.
Sure.
Um, are there any? Well, this is a point. I don't know if you and I will agree on this. Do you think there is a core to the story? Do you think it is an entirely invented foundation myth, or do you think it's a foundation myth based kind of like the Mayflower, rooted in fact? Um, what is your take?
So there are some theories out there, and we were talking about this before we hit record. There are some theories out there that maybe there was a very, very small scale inspiration for the biblical version. That the version in the Bible is not historical, but it's based on very, very loosely something like it that did happen. And there are some reputable scholars out there who argue this. I personally don't agree with them. I think that the evidence available, at least within the Bible itself, and I think that's really the only evidence we actually have, is that we have a more or less completely fictional foundation myth that was very, very loosely inspired by other historical events that might have been pushed back based on social memory. I think one of the possible inspirations would be events in the reign of a much later Israelite king named Jeroboam II, where he seems to have been not a restorer, but he's using his kingship to kind of bolster his kingdom, where he's building. He's putting funds into these holy sites over here, and he's building up ones over here, and he's kind of building up his kingdom in a way that can rally his population, unify them around a single ideology, something like that. And some of the things he was remembered for by his early contemporaries and people just after them was the construction of holy sites for his deity Yahweh, or perhaps Baal, one of Yahweh's rival deities. And this included the construction of images or idols resembling a golden calf.
Mm-hmm.
And then these stories about Jeroboam II were pushed a little bit further back in time to an earlier Israelite king named Jeroboam I, part of a foundation myth for the kingdom of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But then as Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, kind of merged their theologies and traditions together, Jeroboam the first is kind of villainized because what he's doing is idolatry. What he's doing is outside of the sanctioned form of Yahweh worship. Well, let's show how bad he is by making it sort of an original sin within our Exodus story that we're building. And so now it's not Jeroboam who has this golden calf that people wrongly worship. It's this guy Aaron who does it. And Moses, the leader of the Exodus, he's the one who shows that this is wrong, this is bad. Yeah. So you have like this kind of 2-step, 3-step, game of telephone. As history marches forward, they're pushing their memories backward further into their foundation myth. I think things like that, like on a lot of different levels, a lot of different factors, all came together to create this larger mythology of this escape from Egypt, this enslavement by the Pharaoh, and he's being hit by all these disasters by God. And we have to raise up this leader, this Moses guy to rescue us.
So let me play devil's advocate. Really, I'm not even playing devil's advocate. So the idea that they were slaves in Egypt, to me, seems like something you just wouldn't make. It's not really a prestigious thing, even in ancient Southwest Asia to be a slave. So why invent that part? Why? Like, I could see like the Joseph narrative. That's a rags to riches story, classic trope, works perfectly. The Joseph cycle is just amazing literature. But the idea of going from enslaved in Egypt, and the way the narrative describes Israel's wanderings, they are terrible people constantly. It just doesn't seem like something that you would want to make up. It seems like, to me, there's a historical core. And I'll interject the name Richard Elliott Friedman in his book on the Exodus. He makes this point, why make that up? Why have a Moses? Why have Aaron? He's not endorsing a full throttled Exodus with 2 million people. He thinks that's ridiculous. He thinks the conquest narrative did not happen. In fact, I think he says, thank God there was no conquest narrative, because it was just an atrocious event if it did happen. So what would you say to that point, that why make up being a slave in Egypt, and then your chances, like not your chances, but your reputation doesn't improve. I mean, Yahweh is constantly like, I'm just wiping him off the map, and Moses is kind of like, boy, well, let's slow down here. This is your name's in jeopardy. Why make it up?
Well, I think that's a bit of a two-pronged question. One about the enslavement, and one about the negative behavior of the Israelites after their rescue from enslavement. Okay. The enslavement, I think, may have been inspired by, this is a later part of the Bible, which its historicity is also debated a little bit, that when King Solomon, the son of King David, when King Solomon is building up Jerusalem, making it a more grandiose city, and he's building this temple for Yahweh, this brand new holy site, and he's kind of centralizing the Yahweh cult, academic term cult, in Jerusalem. It says that he enslaved many people from the northern tribes of Israel. And Jeroboam the first Israelite king, he's one of these slaves, and he leads a slave rebellion against Solomon. And so that may have played a part in inspiring this enslavement under Egypt, because in this time period, Solomon is married to an Egyptian princess, at least according to the story in the Bible. And so as these northern tribes are rebelling against the south, Judah, with Solomon as king, and his alliance with Egypt, their social memory may be pushed it further south, as that story also migrated into Judah. Well, if Judah's already south, well, then they needed the story to be more south, Egypt.
Even further south, to the major
power. So that's one possible explanation, and I think there's some validity to that one. Again, it's iffy because historical reconstruction is always messy. Yeah, but I think there's some validity there. The other one is why depict Aaron, the brother of Moses, leading the Israelites just after they're rescued in worshiping a false image of Yahweh as a golden cow.
Yeah.
Part of that is inspired by this thing that Jeroboam II did, and they're trying to demonize that, show why it's wrong. So they're taking this much later socio-political, religious polemic and pushing it back to show why it's bad. It goes all the way back to the beginning. Like, even Moses said it's bad.
Yeah.
And you do that with a lot of these. It's all these later debates, these later social interactions and rhetoric being pushed back to the beginning of Israel, which is the Exodus. You have these different priesthoods trying to claim priority over each other. The Zadokites and the Aaronites, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
The Levites, they're all they're trying to say, we're the best priesthood. We need to be the ones in charge of religious expression in Judah and Israel. This is why these ones are bad. That those stories, those debates get historicized in the Exodus narrative.
Yeah. So one of the underlying issues that we don't have time to talk about, but it's kind of a working assumption here, is that like when you bring up Jeroboam, when you bring up these narratives from Kings, and then you're saying it's kind of pushed back into Exodus and Torah. There's the assumption that Kings is older than the material in the Torah, which is it's a common scholarly position, that the Deuteronomistic historians material, which is that material from Joshua, I guess you can count Deuteronomy, through to Kings, skipping Ruth. Ruth does not count. That belongs to a stream of tradition that is in some sense older than the narrative portions, at least when they were written, that you find in Genesis through Numbers.
Yeah.
Although I think I'm inclined to think the J material is probably even older. I just happen to think that's probably older than Deuteronomy, the D material. But either way, that's kind of an assumption that we're working with, that maybe if it appears in Exodus, why is it older? Why isn't it older than stuff in Kings? Well, because the way the Bible was written,
the authorship of the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jews call the Tanakh, was not linear.
Exactly.
It's written all out of order, and different documents are being combined to make new documents.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the New Testament. Matthew was not the first book to be written. Paul's letters are much older,
written by 7 different occasions, all stitched together.
yeah. Let's not get into that again. Oh boy. Oh, good Lord in heaven. But it's the same idea: is that the canon is constructed. It's not. It doesn't just drop out of the sky, and even the form the canon takes. Most people who are going to watch this are probably Protestants. They probably have like a Christian past. Their Old Testament goes from Genesis to Malachi, but the Hebrew Bible in general, when you look at most versions of the canon for Jews, it goes from Genesis, the beginning of the Torah, to Chronicles, because Ezra, Nehemiah, Ruth, Chronicles, these books are all the last to be written, and so they end up being placed in the Ketuvim, the writings, instead of the earlier portions. But yeah, I think we probably need to say that, because people are like, well, the Torah is older. No, not exactly.
The arrangement of the Old Testament or Tanakh or Hebrew Bible is partly theologically motivated.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the order of the books and the meaning you derive from that order.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that was something else I was going to ask or object to. I can't remember what it was, because we got off on the tangent, and it wasn't even a tangent; it was legit on the slavery issue. Why can't I think of it? I should have written it down, and I didn't.
It's too late. Let's move past it.
Yeah, let's move past it. Okay, so it's implausible. There's tons of issues with the numbers in terms of like how many people left, and there's dating issues. Right? We talked some about the dating of the Exodus.
we glossed right over that.
I mentioned.
I said one little thing about it.
Yeah.
The summary of that is the Bible is internally inconsistent on when the Exodus should have happened.
Yeah.
Based on which part of Genesis or Exodus or Second Kings, or First Kings, that you're reading, it's a range of about 300 years on the earliest it could have taken place or the latest.
So we have a date in the 13th century, which is the
around
the latest.
1230 BCE,
Yeah,
or
and then
around
there's
1450 BCE.
yeah, so that's a pretty big range. It would
Yeah,
be entirely different pharaohs, and of course, we don't have the advantage. The narrative never tells us who the pharaoh is. It's an
right.
unnamed figure, which is also a tell. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
you know, because the Bible does name pharaohs here and there.
Yeah.
Mainly because the author involved is either a contemporary writing at that time, they just know, oh, they have better records, but these old events, they don't have any names whatsoever. So, two very different times, it would have been two very different pharaohs. So let's kind of get into that some more on the dating issue.
Sure. So back in the book of Genesis, when God first contacts Abraham, or Abram as his name is originally, he early on, God tells Abraham, your descendants will be enslaved in Egypt for, what is it, 430 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. 430 years, something like that. I think it's Genesis 15 or so, somewhere around there. And the later parts of the Deuteronomistic history kind of roll with that number. You know, when you read the book of Judges and it gives these references to the Exodus as a past event, the numbers it gives slowly build up, and it implies that the 400-ish range is how long the enslavement in Egypt lasted. And then you get to First Kings, when Solomon is finally building a temple for Yahweh in Jerusalem. It says the Exodus took place 480 years before the temple was built. So it kind of gives us this place in history for when it happened and how long it took place. But if you go read the final chapters of Genesis and the opening chapters of Exodus, and select chapters in book of Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and whatever else, where they give genealogical data about the people before the Exodus and during the Exodus and after the Exodus, it's really only about 150 years at most.
Yeah.
There's just one or two generations between Moses leading the Exodus and his ancestor moving to Egypt before the enslavement. That it just can't possibly reach 430 years. And the thing is, ancient Jewish scribes recognized this problem, and they made changes to the text of Genesis when God tells Abraham about the enslavement, so that the number, that duration of 400 something years, they include the parts where Abraham and his son and his grandson are kind of wandering around as nomads before the enslavement. And they do that in different ways. So the Samaritan version of Genesis makes this change, and the Greek version of Genesis makes this change, but they make it in different ways. To show, like, when we compare them and contrast, we can kind of see how they recognize that there's this problem here about this duration, this timeline, and they make kind of similar but not identical changes to fix that timeline. And then you have other parts of not just the Torah, but outside the Torah, also in genealogical data, that assume the descendants of Abraham never were enslaved in Egypt. There's a story about one of Abraham's great grandsons named Judah, and his relationship with a woman, and his son and his grandsons and his great grandsons. And the way the story is told, it gives no indication he ever moved to Egypt, or that his children and children and children ever moved to Egypt. That they remained in their homeland. And then you have a genealogy in Chronicles. Chronicles is written hundreds of years later, after Exodus and Deuteronomy and Second Kings and whatever. It's written hundreds of years later. And in this long 9-chapter genealogy, you have this one little detail that's very, very easy to miss because these chapters are so boring, where it talks about a handful of the descendants of Abraham living in the land that's promised to them by God, but they're living there during the time that they are supposed to be enslaved in Egypt.
Yeah.
Did they escape early, or were they ever enslaved? Did they just not join their family when they moved down to Egypt? The story just assumes it never happened.
Yeah.
So you have 2 or 3 different timelines for when this Exodus and enslavement in Egypt ever took place, one of which assumes it didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So and that's another point. And it's related to the subject of when these texts were dated, is you have different traditions present in these texts, and they don't always agree on everything. But whoever redacted the Torah and all these texts sometimes tried to gloss over them, tried to make them smooth out the wrinkles, but sometimes just kept them as they were.
Either they didn't recognize it as a problem, or they just didn't notice it.
Yeah. Well, for example, the story you were just referring from First Chronicles about the Ephraimites, right? The descendants of Ephraim. Unless
what's the term? Cattle, something or other. They were stealing cattle essentially.
Yeah.
In the highlands of Canaan.
Yeah, and they were, and the story is that the residents of Gath, is it they go is it up to get them? I don't have the text in front of me, but if you're not paying close enough attention to the story, it's just like this interesting little anecdote.
Yeah.
But when you really plug it in,
you have to think about an issue. You have to place it in its context, and its context is, wait, they're supposed to be hundreds of miles that way.
Yeah. And it was Nat, I mentioned before, but Nat Rittemeyer of biblicalhistoricalcontext.com, he wrote a blog post on this that is the first time I ever saw it. And for those who have never been to his website, he has a whole series on ancient Israelite origins that is just really, really good.
Plug that link down below too.
Yeah, Nat, he's a layman, Christian, but he does not buy into the traditional, what he calls Sunday school version of Exodus, and he has I think 8 or 9 part series where he goes through it, and it's just really solid, great citations. He knows stuff, so. That's where I first learned it from, was him. And I was like, what? I'd read Chronicles before, probably half asleep, because like you said, it's so boring.
I once read that genealogy from Chronicles to my wife to get her to fall asleep, because she could not fall asleep one night, and it worked. She made it to chapter 2.
Well, good on her. Good at making it that far. What is it? Is it from The Simpsons? These guys are begatting their brains out. Yeah. But either way, like I said, there's varying traditions in the narrative. These narratives, it's not a single story. It's multiple stories woven together. If you just assume, for example, that Moses wrote all of Genesis through Deuteronomy, you're going to run into major issues. It does not work. So the sooner you can appreciate that these are multiple traditions that a redactor has combined, the sooner you'll be better able to appreciate that it's not always as it says. There's more that is going on here than just meets the eye. So the dating is screwed up, to put it mildly. There's different traditions for the dating. So the population's an issue, the dating's an issue. Are there any other major problems with these with the Sunday school version of events that we are typically told? I'm trying to think.
If you want to get into the finer details and some of the I don't want to say fringe, but the more obscure scholarly debates, there is somewhat of a debate on Moses himself. Like,
oh yeah,
not just whether he existed or not, but how did he get his name? And the story of Exodus is he was named by, what is it, the handmaiden of the Pharaoh's wife, something like that. My memory is trying to blur together the
he was drawn on water
movie version with the biblical text. But he's according to the story of Exodus, he is named Moses because he was pulled from the water, and it's a pun. It's a Hebrew wordplay. His name sounds like this verb being pulled from the water. But then you have a possible actual Egyptian origin of his name, that when you look at a lot of these pharaohs, Ramesses, Tutmos, stuff like that, or names like that, Moses appears to be a legitimate Egyptian suffix for personal names.
Yeah.
That in the native language, Moses is Egyptian and not Hebrew as a name. But then the counter to that is Moses in Egyptian, Moshe, should mean son of. You know, Ramesses means son of Ra.
Yeah.
Or Tutmos means son of Tut.
Yeah.
Moses should mean son of
who? Yeah.
Who? Which kind of implies maybe the person who came up with the name Moses wasn't familiar enough with Egyptian that they just grabbed this name out of midair without really understanding what it meant. And it sounded Egyptian enough, foreign enough.
Yeah.
But it led to a problem that it's son of who?
So,
Then there's the possibility that, is it Hosea or Amos? I forget which one. They're giving a recap of an Exodus-like tradition, and they mention the prophet who led the Exodus, you know, the escape from Egypt.
Yeah.
They don't give him a name. Does that mean that this author, Hosea or Amos or whichever one it was, does that mean they didn't know this prophet's name? That they didn't know his name was Moses? Or did it mean that this prophet had not yet been named in the story? That he was just an anonymous prophet? So there's some debate on these things. It's a slight problem, but it's a little bit more on the technical side.
Yeah. One of the arguments that Friedman makes is that Moses appears to be an Egyptian name, and that there are numerous, specifically Levite names that have Egyptian origins, and he thinks maybe this is a tell that and if you haven't read the book by Friedman, you really need to. I mean, whoever's watching this, read the book. So good. It's really good. That the Levites are the ones that escape from Egypt, or the tribe that become Levites, and they join Israel, who was already in the land. They're already, like, they were always there. They're just Canaanites. And the existence of these Egyptian-style names, including Moses, and a whole host of other factors, is a tell that, you know, this story is true. It's just not true the way you think it is. So, we're going to need to stop there for this episode. And in the next episode, I think we're going to have to get into this a whole lot more. There's a lot more to cover. So before we close, one of the things that we talked about offline, or before we hit record, was just books we've been reading, or you know, good material we've been kind of perusing. So what you got, Mark? Anything good that you've been able to dig into lately?
Well, I saw this fantastic sale on a certain website where the book, I think it was normally $35, and it was on sale for $3 or $4, something like that. Just an outrageous discount. It's like, I can't pass that up.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and bought it, and it just arrived, I want to say 2 days ago. And I think I'm into chapter 2, and I've been taking a little bit of notes here and there. may potentially turn this into a book review on my website.
Oh, nice.
But this is Crucified, the Christian Invention of the Jewish Executioners of Jesus by J. Christopher Edwards. No relation.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's got that chapter that you showed me. Also, it's like 4 pages. Excursus on 1 Thessalonians 2, which we talked about last time.
Some more formal chapters, and then he takes what other academic books normally put like into a little block on the page, and he makes it a mini chapter called an excursus.
Yeah.
So he has a handful of those. And it just looked really interesting to me, and it's on a topic I've kind of written about in one of my articles. But he's going to go much more into the not just to the text of the Gospels when it comes to this topic of Jesus being killed by Jews, but the reception history of that in Christianity after the Gospels, like in later decades and centuries. So that's the part I'm pretty interested in seeing.
It's I picked up a copy too, and I'm really interested to dig into it. I just don't have time yet. I've got 1,000 other books I'm reading. I'm trying to get through. I'm finishing up Chris Keith's book, The Gospel as Manuscript, which has been really good. I like Chris Keith. He's a careful scholar, and he's really interesting to read some of his thoughts on his interaction with Matthew Larson's book on the Gospels. He has some firm disagreements, and so it's interesting to see how scholars interact with one another. And also, because we mentioned the book, this is Richard Elliott Friedman's The Exodus, and I cannot recommend this book enough. It's so good. I don't think it's gained a lot of traction, which is unfortunate. But man, it is so well written. In fact, the quote that I have that I end every episode of Bible Study for Amateurs, and that I have in my Blue Sky profile, is from this book, that one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. I thought that was such a good line, just a great line. So it's a book I recommend a lot.
Friedman is a fantastic scholar who, again, his opinions are not fringe; they're just more outlying.
Yeah, he pushes the
envelope. They're respectable opinions. He's not pulling this out of thin air. He has good reasons for thinking the way he does.
Yeah, he's best known for his work on the documentary hypothesis. Yeah, he kind of represents an older school on that, but his book, Who Wrote the Bible, is just fantastic. It's a good intro.
Book in the Bible. That's another good one.
Yeah. So it's just, those are, anything but Friedman I recommend. He's really great. So, well, we're going to end this episode here. So if this is your first time watching, I'm Ben, and that's Mark, and this has been Amateur Hour. Thank you.